Welcome, folks. Looks like we're starting. Welcome, folks. I'm Councilmember Rex Richardson in the city of Long Beach. I'm glad you joined us this evening for this conversation. This is CiviTalks. It's an idea that we started based on the need to really bring people together and have more conversations about the issues that people care about and the issues impacting our own communities and it started with a number of Facebook Live events where I'd have a one-on-one rundown conversation and people enjoyed it. I think my first one was with my neighbor Joni and people enjoyed it. And then we had some others and we decided we're going to formalize this and it's CiviTalks. And so we're starting today. We have some distinguished speakers joining us that we look forward to talk with. We'll be having a conversation about our economic recovery in Long Beach. We know that we've had a difficult time, and as chair of economic development, I get to have a firsthand view or perspective on many of the industries and the impacts to people and to businesses. And so we wanted to start with this conversation, and this may be the theme for the first few talks. Before we get started, just want to give a few general community updates. I know, again, we can't be together, so we take every opportunity we can just to share what information that we have. I think the first thing I want to talk about is just earlier today, Mayor Garcia and Dr. Anissa Davis announced our vaccine plan. And so 3,900 doses of vaccines will be delivered to Long Beach by the end of this month. And what that means is we needed to develop a plan, an organized plan to equitably distribute these vaccines, prioritizing healthcare workers and residents at long-term care facilities, staff at long-term care facilities, paramedics, EMT personnel. And so you can find more information on that vaccine plan on our city's website. Secondly, we had some pretty big news just yesterday. A few months ago, I expressed my intent to bring a voice back to our regional air quality board. That's called South Coast Air Quality Management District. It's an important board, represents about half of the state of California on the rules and the policies related to air quality and the things that impact our air quality in our communities. It's been important to me. I think it's intersectional with equity, and folks know that, equity relates to our environment, our economy, and a whole host of issues, health, and we hadn't had a voice on that board in about a decade. What's important, I think, is for people to know that, this board, Long Beach needs a voice on this board. We're 500,000 residents. We deal with our economy and our people are deeply engaged with both industry, but we live in the communities that are impacted, like my community in North Long Beach. And we hadn't had a voice in a decade since former council member Tonya Reyes-Uranga served on that board. So I thank the mayors from across the 51 cities. We had a lot of great conversations. I learned so much about these cities, and we were able to go ahead and secure that seat. And so what that means is for the next few years, I'll be helping update the air quality management plan that regulates things like our airport, things like ports and warehouses and trucks that drive through our neighborhoods, and things like that. And my goal would be, to continue to advance, clean air and equity, and those would be my priorities. So that's important. I wanted to make sure that we flag that for you. Next, obviously, we have numbers in terms of COVID that we update daily. So we have 19,608 total positive results in Long Beach, 422 new cases since yesterday. That's an astounding number. Our 7-day positivity rate is 9.9%. We have 50.3 7-day case rate per 100,000 population. We know that those we're tracking by zip code, the 90805 zip code, 90813 zip code, have the highest levels, the community I represent. There's been 288 fatalities, 93 Long Beach residents hospitalized currently. And so this is certainly an important moment that we're in, and I encourage everyone to stay home and stay safe. And we're going to do as many things as we can virtually to continue to engage with folks. So those are just some updates that I have for you before we get into the conversation. Now, why are we starting with economic recovery? Well, I'll tell you, the national, we have new leadership coming in Washington, D.C., and they're focused on an inclusive recovery nationwide. When I say inclusive, I think not just about economic recovery, you have to think about the social and health recovery of people as well. And so our federal government is aligning that way. In my role as president of Southern California Association of Governments, we're laser focused on the region's recovery. SCAG represents Southern California, 6 counties, 191 people, 191 cities, representing 19 million people. And we just last week hosted our regional economic forum, which was themed Charting an Inclusive Recovery. So if we know the national government is focused on recovery, our regional government is focused on the recovery, what should Long Beach be doing? We should be focused on our recovery for a number of reasons why. And so the City Council is taking actions, and our economic development team is laying the groundwork for this, and it's going to be something we really prioritize heading into the first months of the year. But we can talk about these things now. And so we're honored to have brought together an esteemed group of panelists today to help have a fireside chat with us about our economic recovery. And before I introduce them, I want to tell you, you'll be able to engage. We're going to have a presentation, we're going to have some comments, and then we're going to have a fireside chat. And as questions are raised in the Q&A, I'm going to raise these questions, and we'll be able to have a conversation. This won't be very formal. We're just going to talk for about an hour, 15 minutes or so. And so let me start with introducing the panelists. We have first our good friend, Dr. Seiji Steimetz from Cal State Long Beach. He is a professor. He's chair of economics and director of the Office of Economic Research at Cal State Long Beach. He also serves on the executive committee of MetTrans Transportation Center, which is a joint research center of University of Southern California and Cal State Long Beach. Seiji's research expertise is on applied econometrics. That's a lot to say, with emphasis in transportation, urban, and environmental economics. His research is published in leading economics and in interdisciplinary journals. So Seiji helps us figure it out. Seiji's the guy at Cal State Long Beach that helps Long Beach figure it out. Secondly, we have Mr. Curt Castagna. Curt has a diverse background in aviation, over 40 years of expertise in operations and management, facility design, sustainable development and construction, leasing, negotiations, business development, and a proven track record in airport advocacy, community, and governmental affairs. He's the president of our local airport, Long Beach Airport Association, and so we can't have a conversation. And the reason we wanted to start with aviation is that to move forward, we're going to have to leverage our significant economic drivers, and logistics and goods movement and aviation have a deep history in Long Beach. And we just recently saw the loss of Gulfstream, and it's important for all of our community to understand the asset of our airport and how that will factor into our recovery. And then next we have a Long Beach resident, a significant leader in the aviation space, Eduardo. He's managing director and senior counsel in the government and regulatory affairs practice at Clark Hill. He also served, and this is really, really key, he served as a presidential appointee in the Obama administration's FAA. He was associate administrator for airports. He oversaw a $3.5 billion annual federal airport aviation grant program and passenger facility charge collections totaling $2 billion. He also managed programs for the National Airport Planning and Development, including safety standards, design and engineering, certification, environmental processing, and financing. He's a Long Beach resident, and he's going to help us figure out. I think we're going to have a conversation about what should we expect from a larger national policy and aviation standpoint. What can we expect in Long Beach? What should we see? What's happening across the country? And so we have a very well-balanced panel. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to invite Dr. Seiji to start by providing a little bit of context about what's happening with our local economy. Seiji, you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much, Councilmember Richardson. It's always an honor to serve the city and to serve you. If I could appeal to the producing team here to put the slides up. I like to build anticipation with awkward silences. That way people are really eager to hear what I'm going to say.
It's working.
Okay, here we go. Almost there. Okay, thank you. So again, as Councilmember Richardson said, I am Seiji Steimetz. I'm with Cal State Long Beach, and we are very proud to be partners with the university in helping chart the city's economic recovery. We can go to the next slide, please. All right, so my job tonight is really to very briefly set the economic stage for the discussion that's going to follow. And so I'm going to try and do that in as quickly as I can by first talking about how has COVID impacted Long Beach's economy, and with some attention paid to understanding who is struggling the most to recover right now. And then, what are some discussion items, and what are some recommendations for how we should plan Long Beach's economic recovery? And I want to talk about, what do we need to do in the immediate, like right away? Then what are some short-term planning we can do? And then, of course, if we want to be resilient to these kinds of events or recessions in general, then what kind of long-term planning ideas can we come up with? Next, please. Okay, the quickest way to understand how the pandemic has affected Long Beach is just simply to look at unemployment rates, right? This is the percentage of people who are looking for work who cannot find a job. Now, back at the beginning of the year, so if you see on the left of this graph here, unemployment was at 4.6% in Long Beach, and that's among the lowest it's been in several years. So, we had a growing and healthy economy. And then within just a couple of months, once the shutdown started happening, unemployment rose to 21%. So at its peak in May, there were about 46,000 Long Beach residents that were jobless. Fortunately, there's been some recovery since then. Right? In October, our most recent unemployment data show that there's about 31,000 unemployed, which is a 13.1% unemployment rate. So what that means is that about a quarter of the jobs that were lost during the shutdown have been regained, but unemployment is still, it's about 3 to 4 times higher than it was at the beginning of the year. So that shape you see, that steep rise followed by a sort of shallow drop, that's kind of the Nike swoosh or inverted Nike swoosh recovery that people talk about. So it was a deep hit followed by a cautious return to normal. Next slide, please. Now, the overall unemployment rate just tells you what's happened to everybody in Long Beach. But I think it's important, and I'm preaching to the choir when I say this to Councilmember Richardson. He's a real champion of economic inclusivity and equity. But I think it's important to say this over and over. Let's look at this square, this graphic I put on the left of what you're seeing on your screen. So over the last 5 years or so, really over from 2014 to 2018, what I have here is a heat map of neighborhoods that are in poverty. So these are poverty rates according to federal poverty guidelines. What percentage of families are in poverty across these different neighborhoods? Now, the darkest red areas means the greatest concentration of poverty. In this graphic, it's anybody in the dark red is over the 18, those are neighborhoods with 18% or more families in those areas living in poverty. And you can see a pattern, right? And this is not, those who are familiar with Long Beach's socioeconomic geography, this is not surprising, right? The west side and downtown areas have considerably lower income areas, and then you head up to the north side. We start to see a similar concentration of lower income families. Now on the right, what we have is, I took all of the unemployment claims, right? So these are new unemployment insurance claims filed by Long Beach residents this year. And what I did was I divided by the number of workers who live in each zip code to give us an idea of on a per worker basis, who suffered the greatest concentration of unemployment. Now, bigger circles represent greater concentrations of unemployment in the city. And if you look at the two graphs together, you can see a similar pattern, right? The moral to this story is that those who were kind of suffering the most to begin with when times were good were impacted the most during the pandemic, right? Unemployment concentrations are greatest in areas that were already lower income and suffering higher poverty rates. All right, next slide, please. And this is not just Long Beach, of course. If we look at, we're going to see similar patterns nationwide, but if we look at just LA County, for example, What this graph here is showing you is the employment level now as a percentage of what we had in January. So January is the benchmark, is our starting point. And if we take a look at that green line, for example, that green line is the trend in the employment levels of people who make more than $60,000 a year in LA County. We see that dip and then that rise, right? And after all is said and done, there's employment among those who are in relatively high income jobs is about 3.7% lower than it was at the beginning of the year. In other words, for relatively high income workers, there's been considerable recovery, and some argue even that for the high income groups that the recession's essentially over. Now, let's look in contrast at the red line. This is employment for people who make less than $27,000 a year. We see that dip down during the shutdown. We see a little bit of a recovery, and then the red line's going in the wrong direction, isn't it? All right. In fact, right now in LA County, employment among those who earn less than $27,000 a year is close to 30% lower than it was since the beginning of the year. So the point of these two slides is to really reinforce that there have been very disparate impacts of this pandemic on different people, where those who are kind of disadvantaged to begin with are bearing the brunt of the economic impact. And then next slide, please. Okay, so who is struggling to recover? I mean, I could show you 50 different slides of this, but I won't. So of course, low-income workers. In particular, unemployment is hitting Long Beach's lower-income residents the hardest. I think the data clearly show that. Also, workers with limited educational attainment, which is correlated with low-income workers. For example, 54%, the majority of Long Beach residents filing unemployment insurance claims this year have a high school education or less, despite they're only representing about 39% of the working population that's age 29 or over. In other words, there's a disproportionately large number of unemployment claims coming from those with lower educational attainment. Right? This is people who, this isn't just people who haven't been to college. I mean, this is people with no vocational training or skills training beyond high school. And then workers, of course, in face-to-face or tourism occupations. A relatively large proportion of Long Beach's workforce actually works in this strange sector called other services. Not a strange sector, but strangely named. These are people who work in personal care, hair salons, nail salons, and also people who provide services such as auto repair. And in that sector, since February, jobs are down about 23%. Of course, we're all familiar with the woes of the full-service restaurant industry and Long Beach's reactions and policy attempts to reach out to this industry. But employment right now in full-service restaurants is 37% lower than it was before the pandemic, before the shutdown. And then finally, accommodation, like hotel jobs, are down 44% since the beginning of the year. Next slide, please. So, what are some things to think about as we chart Long Beach's economic recovery? And understanding that I'm just one voice, all right? And understanding that many people in this room right now have already thought about these things, but they're worth restating to frame the conversation we're going to have tonight. Immediate action. What do we need to do right away? I think it's clear we need to contain the coronavirus until a vaccine is fully deployed. I mean, our economic health is intimately tied to our physical health. Right? We need to wear masks and practice social distancing. And these public health orders we see, short-term public health orders, more stringent controls on interactions and business openings, those cause economic damage, but far, far less economic damage than large-scale shutdown. Right? And then in the short term, we need to continue or develop relief measures that recognize the disparate impacts of the pandemic on different socioeconomic groups. Right? And then also continue with adaptive and innovative policies such as Long Beach's Open Streets initiatives and other ways to be flexible and try and get through this until a vaccine is deployed. Next slide, please. And then to talk about the long term, what are things we need to think about in terms of long-term recovery and resilience? That's also inclusive. I apologize, this is going to be the nerdiest graph, but I can't help myself. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of Long Beach on the left as just one set of businesses, and then on the right is just other regions. It could be outside of our local region, it could be outside of the state, it could be in another country, right? We import goods from other regions. Things like farm produce or cars. These are things that are produced somewhere else that Long Beach residents consume. We also sell to the rest of the world. We sell things like marine cargo handling. And tourism is actually selling or exporting to the other world. We're selling to people who don't live in our region. And this is a basic economic principle that's worth restating. Long Beach's income increases as it exports more than it imports. Right? If we have local retail trade and we develop that, for example, that's important to serve our community, but understand that those are dollars circulating within our region. To grow our economy and to raise job opportunities and perhaps income levels, you really need to be selling something to other regions or exporting to other regions. So as a long-term resilience strategy, it's to focus on attracting more exporting types of industries, and with that, capital investment and more jobs and higher paying jobs. The next slide. So with that in mind, in terms of planning for long-term resilience and inclusivity, it's worth investing in attracting exporting industries to Long Beach, such as, of course, aerospace and well, I'll leave it at that. Aircraft, aerospace, right? That general category, that's an example of a capital-intensive industry that sells to other regions, right? Aerospace has much larger job creation multipliers, meaning as you make jobs in that industry in an area, it creates several more jobs through an economic multiplier effect. And these higher job multipliers mean faster recoveries, right? Also, increased capital investment implies faster recovery. But of course, if we're going to talk about an inclusive long-term plan, if you're going to create these new skilled opportunities in Long Beach, you also have to make sure Long Beach residents have access to those opportunities. So with attracting exporting industries, it comes investment in job training and workforce development. You want to enable Long Beach workers to take advantage of new skilled labor opportunities, and of course, ensure equal access for disadvantaged and traditionally underserved communities. And then finally, I believe it's important to develop data-informed strategies, right? The economy is changing on a month-by-month basis. It's important to keep a finger on the pulse of that. And I'm very proud that Cal State Long Beach is able to assist the city with its data and research needs to help aid in its development efforts. And so with that, I hope that frames our discussion tonight. And thank you for listening.
Absolutely. I think you certainly, we can take down that slide now. So a number of these slides really stood out to me. In fact, where you showed that, people of higher incomes are almost back to the place that they were prior to the pandemic. And the trend is heading in a very different direction for low-wage workers. And if you think about the population of our city, what would you say is the share of our do we have a lot or a little bit of our population in that sector, that red category? What percentage of our city is?
About 18% of families in Long Beach are living below the federal poverty guideline.
Okay, so about 1 in 5 people in Long Beach are heading in the wrong direction right now.
Yeah, 1 in 5 families, yes.
1 in 5 families. Okay. So, and I appreciate that you brought up aerospace. Certainly have, and that's a great segue. I want to invite into the conversation Eduardo Angeles. Eduardo, so you have a different perspective than all of us do. You see what's happening, around the country. You've dealt with this intimately. What's happening around the country, and what are the things that we should factor into our recovery plan as it relates to opportunities in aviation or aerospace?
Well, thank you, first of all, Councilman Richardson, for allowing me to share my thoughts and for the invitation to chat with you. I will be addressing issues at a 30,000-foot level, to use an aviation term, in terms of what's happening. First of all, in terms of Long Beach, I want to commend the leadership with Cynthia Goodry. You couldn't have a better airport director leading the airport in Long Beach to the kind of discussion that we're having, specifically in terms of economic recovery. She is able to problem solve and be innovative. I had the great pleasure of working with Cynthia when I was at Los Angeles World Airports. Let me just begin by basically making a statement to say that a moment of crisis is a great opportunity for innovation. And I think this is a time and a moment from which we have that opportunity. I've had the pleasure of working on policy level positions with the Biden-Harris campaign, and so I know a little bit about the direction in terms of where their priority is going to be. Number one, the economic challenges that we have in terms of recovery, the number one thing that we need to do is get the people comfortable with flying again, because airports are really our economic engines, right? We talk about the golden goose in Long Beach being the port, but aviation and airports need to be as vibrant in terms of primarily because of the fact they are an economic engine for any community and society in city across the country. So then I believe the number one thing in order to get folks back flying is some mandates regulatory-wise from the federal government, including the mandating of wearing masks when you fly. I see the first day and the first 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration to mandate that out of the Department of Transportation and the FAA. I also want to focus a little bit on in terms of the comments on the Build Back Better. I believe that the administration will be working on economic recovery that focuses a lot on trying to address the COVID and the vaccine. Those are all immediate and necessary actions that need to be taken. But then forward thinking as it relates to that, we need to be talking about infrastructure improvements. We need to talk about basically climate change and in its effect. And then, of course, the innovation that relates to climate change and sustainability, programs that create jobs, and then which then trickles down to social equity issues, environmental, all throughout I think the phase of the Biden-Harris administration, you will see interwoven into it those two themes: sustainability, climate change, and social equity issue throughout the administration. Those I think are going to be a deep priority. So in all the programs that we're talking about at Long Beach Airport, we have to be cognizant and recognize the fact that recovery can take place, importantly, with those two things in mind, trying to figure out how to electrification of bridges and solar paneling of buildings, all of the issues for climate change that is going to be a direct priority, honestly, for the Biden-Harris administration. These are exciting times as well because of the opportunity for change in these issues. The vaccine is right around the corner. My son actually is an emergency physician. Looking forward to him being at the front line getting the vaccine because I worry about him every day that he goes to work. So I think these will be very, very exciting times as we turn to the new year. I'm eager and anxious to hear about what other people questions they may have, but I see that those are actually going to be the things that are for us in the next year in 2021.
Thank you, Eduardo. I think those are very important comments, and I think the things that when we think about this, you say federal mandates. As a local government person, what I think is we need to make sure that our federal legislative agenda locally supports those things because that's good for our local economy. So the way I would process this, I would share this with our federal legislative committee and, my role as president of SCAG. That's good for our region. Those are the types of things that the region should advocate for on our federal government. So that's incredibly important. The other few things that came up that I thought really stood out, when you talk about airports and aviation, that a lot of times people, the word equity isn't the first thing that comes up, or even sustainability, right? And in our conversations in the city, a lot of times we've had conversations about just as neighbors, making sure that the airports are good neighbors and that we maintain our quality of life. We certainly have a robust discussion on that in the city, and that's incredibly important. But we haven't, in my opinion, really dug into how airports can be a driver for sustainability and for equity, which has all those downstream impacts that you mentioned: jobs, sustainability, social equity. So it's better for everyone for us to have that conversation on the front end of our recovery. So thank you so much. I want to invite Curt into the conversation now. Curt, you have been a leader in our local aviation community for many, many years, well respected. And I'd love to get your perspectives on sort of the state of our local affairs as it relates to our local economic impacts to our airport, and what perspectives you might bring into the conversation about the things Long Beach should be doing and doubling down on as it relates to aerospace and aviation.
Thank you, Councilman. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share the panel with this group. I'd like to commend you, too, for having this discussion about the airport and for taking a leadership role and bridging that discussion about our airport that traditionally has had a lot of discussion, as you noted, relative to environmental issues and concerns, to how we mitigate impacts to our neighborhoods. And so I'm a proud Long Beach, been here since 1978 as a kid. Go Beach, graduate of Cal State Long Beach. And I think that our airport plays a vital role in the economic activity of not just Long Beach, but the region. Just in 2019 or 2018, there was an economic forecast that was put out about the airport, and that it created over 46,000 jobs in the region and over $8.6 billion. Just at the airport alone, $1.6 billion and over 10,000 jobs just at the airport alone. And so one of the messages that I've always carried in talking about the business community is how can the business community partner with the city of Long Beach and in the region to maximize the opportunities for our investment from the business side, from the private side, in partnership with the city to do some of the suggestions that Mr. Angeles suggests that are going to be in the next 100 days and beyond relative to further capital investment in this community that's going to create more jobs, and it's going to reduce that impact on unemployment. And with 10,000 job potential here, I think there's a way for us to provide more benefit and be proud of our airport as opposed to being apologetic. And again, so I commend you for that, because I think the airport is as critical to the city as the Port of Long Beach is. Specifically, I think what makes Long Beach Airport really unique in the basin is that we have all the sectors that are representative. It's unfortunate that we lost Gulfstream recently for their business decision, but I wouldn't say that was a Long Beach decision. I would say that was a business decision on their part. But as Mr. Angeles said, it provides opportunity. We have strong leadership at the airport. I've had the pleasure of working with Ms. Guidry. I think she's dynamic. I think she certainly understands what's needed to drive this airport in the future. But most importantly, how do you preserve the diversity of the uses that we have here that make Long Beach unique, that really does protect the interest of the environmental interest of the community? For instance, we have private aviation, we have training, we have corporate aviation, we have the Douglas Park that's the rebirth of what was the Donald Douglas plant and the Boeing plant. We have the revitalization of all those sectors that are working in chemistry together. And as I mentioned to you in another conversation, we even have blimps at the airport. You don't find airships at any of the other major airports because they don't have the diversity of land area and the opportunity to operate. And it's that diversity together with our extremely coveted noise ordinance that protects our neighborhoods from overexpansion of the airport that is a diversity that we really need to maximize. So how do we protect that and mitigate the impacts to the community while maximizing the asset for jobs? And we've touched on some of those points. I think the business industry is very well primed for the next administration to address issues such as sustainable alternative jet fuel that's going to have a direct impact on the emissions of the air. The replacement of leaded aviation gasoline, and how do we create incentives to the industry to create those replacement fuels? Solar sustainability power. I think you're going to see systems come online that are going to be incentives to maximizing that capital investment and what benefits can be achieved through whether it be rebates or tax credits or depreciation, or what incentives can be provided that are not only going to create jobs for those capital investment, but are going to have a direct impact on the environment. And I think our industry, not just here locally, but nationally, is looking for that opportunity for a public-private sector relationship. And the airport's a perfect opportunity for that. In this, this is a jewel that we have here. And then how do we lastly integrate that with the academic side? How do we work with the college? How do we work with Long Beach City College? How do we create those internships and those opportunities and certificate programs to bring people into our airport? Everyone can identify with the pilot, the flight attendant, or the mechanic, or the air traffic controller. But there are so many on-ramps into this industry and jobs, whether it's architecture, administration, engineering. There's thousands of different jobs that are on-ramps into the airport environment. So how do we invite the community out here to see what we're doing, to see what those opportunities are, and then provide academic programs for them that maybe aren't the traditional 4-year program, but more trade school applications that will allow the opportunity to bring those residents from your district and elsewhere in and integrate into the airport, into an environment that's going to create and reduce that unemployment in high-paying jobs, which traditionally airports are much higher-paying jobs, as Dr. Steimetz mentioned.
Right. And, thank you. I mean, you touched on a lot. I just took a couple notes, just the significant impact we already have at our airport and the leadership that we already have with Cynthia, our airport director. We're not starting from scratch. We have the diversity of our airport and the types of uses are our strength. I think that message really came across. I think I'm really interested. I love the fact that you connected and underscored how important partnerships are. I often think about, when I think about an issue, I'll think how to connect this to the community college or connect it to Long Beach State or Cal State Dominguez Hills. I'll think about how to make those things happen. As it relates to our airport, there are some really cool opportunities I think we can explore. I read someone's blog. I read a blog. Local journalist talked about going up in a zero gravity flight out of Long Beach, 0G, and described how ethereal the feeling was to be in 0G, and you can do that in our city of Long Beach. Well, what if we were to, really think about connecting that, the investments we have into space with, our educational institutions, and really do like Huntsville does, and really invest in science centers and academic programs that connect people and really capture an interest into this. This is something that I've always thought about. Like, maybe we could do those types of things. So what are I'll open this up to everyone. I think there's a lens, Seiji, I think, for you, I think there's a lens of how do we make sure whatever innovation takes place there connects to the people. Eduardo, is there an interest nationally in is this a smart opportunity for Long Beach to double down on space and aerospace and aviation? And Curt, how do we bring everyone together, public, private, the people, educational institutions, to do something really special around really making smart investments? So what do y'all think? Anyone? It's fireside. There's no order.
Let me start first of all by indicating when Curt talks about public-private partnerships or P3s, a critical component to that is the public part, right?
Right.
So private industry wants to invest money and there's a lot of talk about having a lot of money available in the private industry, but it really is political will in terms of the public side to allow that, one, to occur, and then two, to invest. When they talk about private partnerships, they don't just talk about a bunch of private money that comes in, and then all of a sudden they take over and they run everything. No, it has to be purely a partnership, just like as Elon Musk has created in many respects as it related to SpaceX. Now, I happen to have worked at LAX. I've seen what was happening in SpaceX and what had happened to that community in terms of Inglewood and all the things that are occurring. They created a fantastic opportunity in terms of a school for STEM students, all of it revolving around a campus that talk about going into the space and aerospace. I think the potential and the opportunity is also there for Long Beach. You need strong leadership to have the will, the political will, to have those things occur so that private industry, you have Virgin Galactic, you have all of those things, and you have those seeds that have been planted. It's really a matter of cultivating it, making it happen, and then believing in it. And like I said, indicated, this is a time of innovation. Biometrics, other things that we're talking about, tickleless technology, things that are in aviation that are necessary, because this is maybe the first pandemic we've suffered in, but it won't be the last. And clearly in aviation, the impact is felt. And so those leaders nationally and internationally are trying to find solutions so that it doesn't duplicate itself in the same way. And technology is the best way. And to dovetail on what Curt is saying, these are high-paying jobs, high-paying union jobs. And so then therefore, this is the kind of work that we want to attract to Long Beach.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. And we'll keep the conversation going. And just full disclosure, Eduardo has a class to teach at 6 o'clock. He may step out a bit early, but we certainly appreciate, his contribution to the conversation. Seiji, I'm going to pull in a question from the audience, and it's really centered on, how do we make sure that women and small businesses and people of color, as we recover, we think about procurement opportunities and local contracting that really boosts it locally. We've had conversations through the Everyone In discussion and initiative around an inclusive procurement policy, but do policies like this really make a big, are they going to make a difference? And are these the types of things we should be investing in here in our city? Are they going to move the needle?
I mean, I can't say that I'm an expert on the procurement process and the impact of more efficient procurement processes on economic activity. I don't see how you can go wrong with it. I mean, I think if we have a data-driven plan to identify those opportunities, right? Part of the issue is not knowing where the inequity is, right? So, teaming up with stakeholders who have a better understanding and building a data-driven understanding of where are there opportunities for more inclusivity and equity in the procurement process. I don't see how that could ever hurt. And then if you don't mind, let me follow up real quick too on a related note on what Mr. Angelos was saying is, with these opportunities in general, be it through procurement or through jobs or high-skilled jobs, I saw in the chat that some people are saying that our educational infrastructure is underutilized. We're very lucky in Long Beach that we have a world-class educational infrastructure through the university and the community colleges. And if you're going to have economic opportunities expanded, I can't stress enough the importance of investing a great deal in workforce development. I mean, to me, that's, if you want to talk about equal access, it's really about making sure that there are, and I'm not just talking about college, right? There's vocational training and certificate programs and skills-based training available for our next wave of Long Beach workers to take advantage of these new opportunities that we're talking about.
And I would add, and before Eddie has to depart the meeting, but I think his experience at Los Angeles and watching the procurement process and what happens if you, I'll call it, over-regulate it to a point where it's now a disincentive for those public-private partnerships. And I don't know, Eddie, if you can talk about that, but we've seen in the procurement process where it handcuffs you to a point where you can't ultimately meet the objective because the rules in place don't permit you to.
Well, let me mention one thing in terms of procurement and outreach. Note, actually, AMAC is recognizing Cynthia Goodry as one of their pioneers, leaders, and AMAC is Airport Council, American Minority Airport Council, Association Minority Airport Council, which is the main lobbying group nationally for minority-owned businesses at airports, and they are in fact recognizing Cynthia Goodry for her leadership in this arena. I think what Curt is referring to is that sometimes when we put regulations, they're well-intended and have great intentions, but have unintended consequences. And I won't use the procurement as an example, but I will share with you the experience in terms of federal government hiring policies for civil servant. It is so bureaucratic, so robotic, and it was intended to level the playing field for those being hired by the federal government, that at the end of the day, it defeats the complete purpose of what it's intended to do, because you're just checking boxes in a Ford document to see what the person has said. And there's an entire industry basically of trying to coach people how to answer the questions the way the civil servant people want you to answer them, as opposed to being a lot more holistic and a lot more opportunity to really get to the answer that you want. And Kurt's referring to that sometimes procurement and outreach and, a lot of things we do in government have unintended consequences, which defeats the purpose of inclusivity.
Well, Eddie, and my comments were really intended to your point about there's the public-private partnership, and it's really the public piece that sometimes is the obstacle to the investment.
Exactly. That is exactly it. Yes.
And so I think workforce development, I think, is a critical component of our direction here too. And we're seeing what you're really seeing in the aviation industry and the airline industry is a rebirth of the airlines. They're reinventing themselves as a result of COVID. And you're going to see the business models change, the aircraft fleets change. Southwest has been successful since deregulation in 1978 because they flew one model aircraft, and so their maintenance and their flights and their training were all very streamlined. And so you're going to see what you're seeing in the news relative to the stress on the airline industry is really directly related to their overhead and their expenses and their operational costs, that you're seeing themselves rebirth themselves. And I think that people talk about, well, we're seeing layoffs in mechanics and flight attendants and pilots right now. A lot of that is being done through attrition, through early retirements. And prior to COVID, we were having significant shortages of air traffic controllers, mechanics, and pilots. And now people think, well, maybe we don't have that because of COVID and what's happening. The truth is, we're going to have a shortage again. And what you're seeing nationally across the country is flight training and mechanic training, and those schools are actually are doing better than you would think, because people are investing in their future. And those are trade schools that, to become a licensed certified mechanic might cost you $5,000, and you can come out of school making $80,000. And these are some of the mysteries of how do we introduce those types of opportunities to our community here to understand that value is there. And it's not just in the airline world or the Gulfstream world, but as it's been noted, you got Virgin Galactic here. Those technical trade schools, those provide opportunities to all sorts of different sectors in the industry that don't require a 4-year degree. And so I think we all can recognize that the value of a 4-year degree in some fields is important. We can also recognize that the world needs trades, and we've lost some of those trade skills. And I think that's where as Dr. Steimetz mentioned, that's where we can embrace the community college and the college system for the certificate programs. I'm also an adjunct with Mr. Angeles at Cal State Los Angeles, and I think he blames me for recruiting him. But one of the things I talk with our students about is that, you might not really need a degree in aviation. The school doesn't necessarily like that approach, but maybe you need a degree in accounting or engineering or something that is really of your interest, and maybe aviation's your minor program. And certificates are equally as important as a 4-year degree in some of what our industry does.
So I'm gonna pause there for a moment. I'll just summarize some of what I've heard, and then I'm going to offer Eduardo, Mr. Angeles, an opportunity to just give some final thoughts before he has to go to class, and then we'll keep the conversation going a bit further. I see a lot of great discussion in the chat. So I hear a lot of emphasis on data, and data, making sure it's data-driven. Emphasis on, public, capitalized public on public-private partnerships. People need be a part and the central focus of the partnerships, and we have a lot that we can contribute to the public-private conversation on the public side. There's a lot of discussion on prioritizing equity and sustainability as a necessity. This is how you maximize and optimize your recovery by emphasizing those things. Both sustainability is good for our long-term economy, and equity is good for the prospects of our long-term economy. The theme of high-quality jobs and the connection to trades and educational institutions, the connection has come up both in the chat and has come up in the discussion. I think people would like to know that, this economic recovery discussion we're having in the city started months ago. We contracted at Cal State Long Beach to begin doing some initial research, and that will be factored into our recovery plans as we move forward. But I want to go to Eduardo. Just any closing thoughts you might have before you head off to class?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this discussion. I think the aviation focus in airport, and I think Councilmember Richardson, you're certainly ahead of the game with respect to having this conversation about economic recovery. I will suggest the second topic, which would be honestly focused on transportation. I think when you're talking about social equity and when you're talking about sustainability, you have to go with surface transportation, rails, buses, because at the end of the day, those folks that are impacted most by economic disparities are those folks who use and rely on those means. And I think in our community, it is vital and important that it is an artery for folks to be able to have access to transportation that allows them to get to and from work. Because it's those folks that don't have cars, and at the end of the day, they are the ones that need to get to and from work. And how do we do that in a safe COVID vaccine, post-COVID world? And I think as a leader in the city, as a public policy person, those are the topics that I think we need to tackle next as a community. That's just as vital in terms of economic recovery. So I want to thank you. I want to thank the panel for having me, and I look forward to further discussions. And I apologize that I have to give a final to my students.
Don't be too hard on them, Eduardo. Thanks a lot for joining. We'll certainly take your feedback under advisement as we continue to move forward. So we're gonna continue to keep the conversation going a little bit longer. I see there's a lot of discussion here. Let's take a deeper dive into sort of what your thoughts are about this. Partnerships keep coming up. Educational institutions and public-private partnerships. Where should we go? What are the concrete recommendations that you have that I, as a policymaker, can take back to my colleagues and say, hey, these are the steps, these are the partnerships we need in place to make sure that we actually have an inclusive recovery? Let's start there, and then I'm going to pull some questions in from the audience.
Councilman, if I may, in having been at the airport for a number of years and watching the highs and lows of the economics recovery of the overall city, it dawns on me that, one of the crises this city faced was back in the early 90s with the closure of the Naval Shipyard and the Naval Hospital, and then ultimately, McDonnell Douglas. And I recall then clearly and met a lot of colleagues during this time that I'm still close with that under Mayor O'Neill's leadership, we had at that time a stronger economic development focus in the city, in the department, and created, as a buzzword, a red team of people that were really engaged as stakeholders within the community from the various sectors that really was responsible for what came, the conversion from a naval town to a tourism town, and in the town center, the Carson Town Center today, which was formerly the Naval Hospital, and Los Altos and the marketplace down on 2nd Street, all of those rebirth came out of that red team discussion. And so I think there's some positive history there that I think we can reflect back on to now look at what are the opportunities that COVID presented to the city, and how can we look at the strong sectors that still remain, whether there's still the tourism part, the medical industry, the technology, the Douglas Park. How can we bring that group together and be really invested stakeholders to say, how can those people give ideas to the public side of the leadership for that investment? at the same time preserving the diversity of uses, for instance, at the airport. I mentioned to Cynthia on a phone call saying, as we move forward and look for opportunities as a result of Gulfstream's departure, how can we backfill that space and bring new technologies, new jobs that meet that integrate in, new avionics and new solar and electric vehicles, and create those same high power jobs, but at the same time protect the diversity of uses at the airport that it successfully have carried it, and at the same time preserve the interest for the neighborhoods. And we know the neighborhoods want to maintain their quality of life. So how do we maintain that quality of life and improve it at the same time creating those jobs? That's where I think a group discussion can take place.
I think, just piggyback on that. Then I want to hear from Seiji, but what I'm hearing is, and the way I would think about this and the way it fits in, is that when we talk about our economic recovery plan, it's not one strategy, but really a collection of strategies that should really be aligned with opportunity areas and risks. And aviation is both an opportunity area and, because we have an airport, a risk. So we would have to actually have an economic recovery strategy specifically for the airport that takes all of the airport and the broader aviation and aerospace sector. That needs to be a plan within the recovery plan, a micro. So I would envision our recovery plan should have micro plans that are sort of targeted to these industries. Is that right, Seiji? Does that sound about right from your perspective?
Yeah, I think so. And for example, there was a discussion in the chat about trying to maximize the city's return on investment of some of these possible assets coming better leveraging the airport and the infrastructure around the airport. And I hate to sound like a broken record being the data guy, but obviously there's the occupational hazard here. We could do, for example, economic impact analyses of airport expansion or aerospace expansion, so you can look at what the trade-off is. As you say, there's always going to be a risk and a cost and then a reward. And I think it's important to try and quantify those things. Understanding, too, that this sort of pure cold numbers-based metric of what gives us the biggest return is just to complement other social, things you can't measure, like the value of inclusivity or equity. But I agree. If what I understand what you're saying is sort of like a micro study of each, it's case by case cost benefit analysis plus social dimensions to complement them. Right.
You need strategies directly connected to what the data says our risks are and our opportunities. And the word expansion is always touchy, right? What are we talking about when we say expansion? Well, I think we are in a unique place where we don't actually have to touch expansion we can talk about growth without talking about expansion, because there is a constriction that's taking place in aviation, right? A business decision, as Curt called it, with a Gulfstream, for example. These are business, so there's a national constriction. So there's capacity for growth. There's capacity for growth within the same parameters, operating parameters that Long Beach is used to. So you can still preserve your quality of life by talking about how to invest in things like aerospace and others. And by partnering together, we can make sure that we're addressing, we make sure there's data driven. I see a question here in the chat. It's asking about the connection between the recovery and the economic blueprint. I'll touch on that, and then if anybody wants to chime in, it's fine. The economic blueprint is really seen. It's supposed to last for about 10 years. It's a long-term, medium to long-term document. And it's been significant. They're starting the update process because we're approaching. It's one of the things we started 7 years ago, and we're beginning. We need to start the process of updating it. Now, the recovery, I think, should be thinking about immediate, so urgent, immediate policy recommendations and strategies, short-term and long-term policy recommendations and strategies, and they should align. So your update of your economic blueprint and your economic recovery plan should align. But what you'll see is we're going to learn a lot from the recovery plan and the data that's going to inform the changes to the blueprint. We may have a whole different game plan for the next 10 years based on the conditions. Some industries will never be the same. And this analysis will certainly help inform the blueprint. I hope that addressed the question there. What do you guys think, Curt, Seiji? Does that sound about right?
I think you're absolutely on the right track. I also think that as you look at the airport as a component of the city's assets, you got to align it with the port and see what the synergies there. But you got to go outside. You know, the airport is not just within the city of Long Beach, but it's within the region. In fact, it's within the state. And so as you look at those changes that you're going to make and the incentives that you're going to create, you want to align it vertically within the state as well, because if you're going to attract business into the airport to invest, you first have to make the state understand too the needs for what their impacts are to their workforce. I think that was one of the challenges that Gulfstream had. Wasn't necessarily a California or a Long Beach related issue, but maybe some California related regulated issues. And so I think as we look forward, we have to align ourselves outside the boundaries of the city and look to the state as well to make sure what we're doing is beneficial there too.
Right, absolutely. I see the issue of procurement is still pretty, it's in the chat. I think we've prioritized. I think we've talked about procurement a lot, and it's represented in our economic inclusion plan in the city. It's in our economic blueprint, but it really hasn't been prioritized by the city. And I think now might be a moment just to kind of address it a little bit. I think now is, an inflection point. Now's the time to look at all of those systems. Because we are, if you think about the relationship between not just the city, but our educational institutions, our port, our transit agencies, our airport, all of our agencies together, even our utilities, our water, our energy. There's a lot of purchasing power here in Long Beach, and I firmly believe that if you want to see others make changes, you should do it yourself. If we want to see corporations be more inclusive in their hiring and their contracting, then Long Beach should do it first. And so the county has done a lot of work around inclusive procurement. I think we, as the second largest city in the region, not people talk about the county, we're the second largest city in the entire SCAG 6-county region. And so we have a lot of purchasing power. And I think that's the type of thing that I think should take more priority moving forward. Prioritizing local businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. I think those are things we need to do to have a direct connection, I think, to some of the statistics that Seiji showed, that, we need to make sure that we're doing all that we can to create ladders of opportunity so people can get out of the lower income bracket, get a trade, get access to an opportunity. We have to create more of those opportunities, and procurement's a good way to do that. So anybody want to just share some additional thoughts there on that, the procurement strategy?
And what opportunities are there to incentivize the larger businesses that are coming to Long Beach to where you're not necessarily regulating their own internal procurement process and hiring, but you're incentivizing them in partnership with the city again, so that they are looking for the diversity within the city and improving their own internal workforce diversity by the incentives the city give them instead of a regulation to do that. And those are some of the missed opportunities that I think we have sometimes, is the corporations sometimes feel possibly, are they being regulated to do it, or can they be incentivized to do it? And I think we should talk about both of those things.
Right. So here's what we'll do. I think we're going to allow you both to offer some final thoughts, and then I'm going to share some next steps, both for this, our next session, as well as, what we're going to do at City Council next week. Before we do that, I do want to know, this discussion on procurement, it doesn't say that we don't have preferences today. What we're talking about is a comprehensive change to it. You can set out goals or preferences all you want, but if the workforce isn't there, or if the subcontractors aren't there, or the capacity isn't there to respond, a lot of times small companies or local companies may not even apply. So you have to have a comprehensive program to develop the capacity of our local businesses. And there's a lot of ways to do that. It's proven. LA County's done this. Other areas have done this, where sometimes you create a different track for smaller contracts than larger contracts, or you keep the big shark from taking all, the big companies from eating all the food. So you separate and you create, think fish tank, you create a little feeder fish tank here to let them grow and hatch before they jump into the next one. There's strategies we can deploy. They're happening around the country. I think now is just the time, and we've looked at them. But now it's time to get serious about, testing some of these across our agencies. But I want to go to our guests. Let's start with Seiji. Seiji, why don't you start off? Give us your final comments, and then Curt, I think you can close this out.
Sure. Well, I think it's important to reiterate right now, if we're talking about in the very short term, starting the recovery, there are in place more strict public health orders right now, right? We're under a much more strict stay-home order, and that is, it's going to be economically costly, and people tend to get obsessed with the economic cost of safer or more strict public health orders. And I just want to make sure people understand that these costs that we incur when we have these safety measures, they're very small, very, very small compared to a wide-scale shutdown that will result if the coronavirus isn't brought under control until a vaccine is deployed. So, we have, if we have to take our medicine now in terms of short-term economic costs to avoid catastrophic economic heart attacks later, then I want people to see that that's the intent. And I can't stress enough how important it is to understand the link between our economic health and our physical health right now. So please, everybody, be safe. Wear a mask.
So tag on to that to say that as a result of doing that, you'll build the confidence then back into the traveling community as it relates to the airport, as Eduardo said, to build people's confidence to feel safe again within the safety measures that have to be mandated on a national level so they're consistent across the country. And I would just close by saying I think it's, again, commend you for having this discussion, because what you said tonight that was really resonated to me was you can have growth without expansion. And in the past, when we've talked about the airport, about going outside the box and looking at opportunities at the airport, it leads to a conversation about the risk for expansion. And I think you can maximize, or a better word, optimize the airport within the regulations that we have today. And then lastly, I would say, to Eddie's point, is to look outside the fence of the airport, and whether it's metro or the linkages of the airport to the other sectors in the community, and as well the academic side. Because I think the academic institutions here that are phenomenal in their own right have the ability to be the link for those students and people looking to expand their own career at whatever level to enter into these workforces. I think that's the venue for that to happen. And so we got to include the academic piece to this as well, the curriculum and the metrics.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Curt, thank you so much for taking the time and helping make this happen. I certainly learned a lot, and we'll continue to count on your counsel and as we figure out this recovery for our community. And Seiji, we wouldn't know what to do if it were not for experts like you and your expert department and at Cal State Long Beach. We are incredibly grateful and gracious for your assistance, and I think our education institution literally makes us smarter at the decisions we make. In local government, we make decisions as a collective. It's not what one council person says. It's not what the mayor says. We make decisions as a body. And a lot of times, having an educational institution and data helps guide better decision making as a collective for our community. And so we all play a role in the sausage making of public policy. Our local institutions play an incredibly important role. And so thank you for playing that role. To all of you, the guests who participated, thank you so much. We're going to do this again. We're going to try to do this, we'll announce the next one. We're trying to do this every 2 weeks and continue a discussion. I love the thought of transportation. It may not be the next one, but we're certainly going to make sure that that's one of the early discussions. So we're going to try to be back in 2 weeks, still working that out. But there's some things that you can do now. On Tuesday, the City Council, this Tuesday the 15th, the City Council is going to consider a recommendation from my committee, the Economic Development and Finance Committee. I serve on that committee with council members Stacy Mungo and Roberto Urunga. And we've been discussing bringing it all together. The data that we did an economic equity analysis that Seiji's been working on, with current COVID-19 data and using that as the backbone for an inclusive recovery plan. By inclusive, we mean it's economic, but it also needs to be social and health. We need to think about our community's overall economic health, social health as we recover. And so you'll have an opportunity. You can you can go to longbeach.gov and watch the meeting. And I encourage you to reach out to your council members and ask them to support this motion. We need to send a clear message that the most important thing we can do for the long-term prospect of our city is to focus and unify behind a comprehensive and inclusive economic recovery. And we will send that message on Tuesday. And the way that we send that message is by having a strong statements of support by the community and by our leaders. And that sends staff and our experts a strong message that this is our priority heading into the new year. As we're deploying vaccines and dealing with capacity, we should be focused on our recovery. Thank you all for joining us. We'll make sure this gets posted on social media, and have a great night. Be safe, wear a mask.
Thank you.
Thank you.